Hillary Clinton pulled off a crooked land deal. Remember Whitewater? False. She was held responsible for the murder of White House lawyer Vince Foster. False. And the Clintons ran drugs out of Arkansas, killing dozens of people in the process. Really, really false.
Air Force One picked us up at the airport in hope for the sad flight back to Washington. The plane was filled with family and friends who tried to lift Bill's spirits. But even on the day he buried his mother, Bill couldn't escape being hounded about Whitewater. White House staff members and lawyers huddled with the president. Everyone was concerned that the drumbeat for appointing a special prosecutor was drowning out Bill's message. I had planned to join Bill in Moscow for the state visit on January 13th. I knew a decision about the special prosecutor had to be made before we left. My gut instinct as a lawyer and a veteran of the Watergate impeachment inquiry staff was to cooperate fully with any legitimate criminal inquiry, but to resist giving someone free rein to probe indiscriminately and indefinitely. The president's political advisors predicted that a special prosecutor would eventually be forced on us and argued that it was better to appoint one and get it over with. I couldn't change their minds. On Tuesday evening, January 11th, I arranged a conference call with Bill in Prague. David Kendall and I met in the Oval Office with a handful of Bill's top aides for a final debate on the issue. Bill was terribly hoarse, and we had to lean into the black, bat-wing-shaped conference phone to hear his voice. "I don't know how much longer I can take this," he said, frustrated that the press didn't want to talk about the historic expansion of NATO that would soon open the door to the former Warsaw Pact nations. "All they want to know is why we're ducking an independent investigation. I think we've just got to do it," he said. "We've got nothing to hide, and if this keeps up, it's going to drown out our agenda." It was time to fold my cards. "I know that we've got to move past this," I said, "but it's up to you." As others left the room, I picked up the phone to talk to Bill alone. "Why don't you sleep on the decision?" I said. "If you're still willing to do it, we'll send a request to the Attorney General in the morning." "No," he said, "let's get this over with." Though it was late, Bernie Nussbaum began to compose a letter to Janet Reno, relaying the president's formal request that the Attorney General appoint a special prosecutor to conduct an independent investigation of Whitewater. On January 20th, 1994, the administration's one-year anniversary, Janet Reno announced the appointment of Robert Fisk as special prosecutor. A Republican, Fisk was highly regarded as a thorough and fair-minded lawyer with prosecutorial experience. As expected, the appointment of a special prosecutor quieted the Whitewater uproar for a few days. But just as predictably, a spate of new accusations and rumors filled the scandal vacuum. Newt Gingrich and Republican Senator Al D'Amato of New York clamored for banking committee hearings in both the House and the Senate to probe Whitewater allegations. Robert Fisk managed to forestall the hearings, warning the combative Republicans that they risked interfering with his investigation. He was moving quickly, as promised, slapping subpoenas on witnesses and hauling them before grand juries in Washington and Little Rock. There were mornings in the spring of 1994 when I woke up aching for all the close friends, associates, and relatives who had passed out of our lives or had been unfairly attacked. My father, Virginia, Vince. David Kendall was becoming my main link to the outside world, and he was a godsend. From the very beginning, he advised me not to read newspaper articles and not to watch television reports about the investigation or any of the related scandals. "That's my job," he said. "One of the reasons you hire lawyers is to have them worry for you." As more of our financial records were released or found their way into the press, they generated additional stories. In mid-March, the New York Times ran a front-page article headlined "Top Arkansas Lawyer Helped Hillary Clinton Turn Big Profit." The story accurately reported the profits I had made in the commodities market in 1979, but it falsely implied that our close friend Jim Blair had somehow engineered my windfall in order to gain influence with Bill Clinton on behalf of his client, Tyson Foods. Could I have done it without Jim? No. Did I have to pay my broker over $18,000 in brokerage fees on my trading? Yes. Did my commodity trading influence Bill's decisions as governor? Absolutely not. I now realized that the constant accusations had taken their toll on my relations with the press. By the end of April 1994, I felt confident enough in David Kendall's research and in my understanding of Whitewater and the surrounding issues that I was ready to offer the media what they wanted: me. I called my chief of staff and said, "Maggie, I want to do it. Let's call a press conference." On the morning of April 22nd, the White House announced that the First Lady would take questions that afternoon in the state dining room. We hoped that a change of scenery would encourage a fresh approach from the media. I didn't calculate what I would wear to this event. My choice of clothes is almost always a last-minute decision. I felt like wearing a black skirt and a pink sweater set. A few reporters immediately interpreted it as an attempt to soften my image, and my 68-minute encounter with the Fourth Estate would go down in history as the Pink Press Conference. One after another, the reporters asked me everything they could think of about Whitewater, and I answered them until they ran out of different ways to ask the same questions. After the press conference, David and I had a drink together in the West Sitting Hall as the sun set beyond the window. As we assessed the day's events, I commented, "You know they're not going to let up. They're just going to keep on coming at us, no matter what we do. We really don't have any good choices here." Robert Fisk released the preliminary finding in his fast-moving Whitewater investigation. First, no one in the Clinton White House or Department of the Treasury had tried to influence the inquiry by the Resolution Trust Corporation, the federal agency that examined McDougal's failed savings and loan, Madison Guarantee. Second, Fisk concurred with the opinions of the FBI and Park Police that Vince Foster's death was a suicide. He further concluded that there was no evidence his suicide had anything to do with Whitewater. Ironically, on the day Fisk's findings were made public, my husband inadvertently paved the way for his replacement by signing the renewal of the Independent Counsel Act sent to him by Congress. It was something he had promised to do, and he kept his word. Because of the growing Republican criticism of Fisk, I had argued against signing the legislation unless the appointment of Fisk was grandfathered into the bill. I shared my fears with Lloyd Cutler, who had replaced Bernie Nussbaum as White House counsel. Lloyd, a true gentleman, assumed he was dealing with men of similar manners, and even told me he would, quote, "eat his hat" if Fisk was replaced. According to the newly enacted law, the independent counsel had to be chosen by a special division, a panel of 3 federal judges appointed by the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court, William Rehnquist. Rehnquist had handpicked David Sentell, an ultra-conservative Republican from North Carolina, to head the special division. On August 5th, the special division announced the appointment of a new independent counsel. Robert Fisk was out, replaced by Kenneth Starr. Starr was a 48-year-old Republican insider, a former appeals court judge who had stepped down to become Solicitor General in the first Bush administration, a traditional path to the Supreme Court. He was a partner in Kirkland & Ellis, a law firm with a lucrative business defending tobacco companies. Starr was a staunch conservative. Unlike Fisk, he had never been a prosecutor. He had been outspoken about the Paula Jones lawsuit, appearing on TV that spring to argue for the right of Jones to sue a sitting president, urging that the case proceed quickly. Starr's appointment greatly slowed the progress of the investigation. Most of Fisk's staff resigned rather than work for him. Fisk had intended to wrap up the investigation by the end of 1994. It appeared Starr's goal from the beginning was to keep the issue alive at least through the 1996 election. Given these troubling conflicts of interest and early warning signs, it was clear that Starr was replacing Fisk not to continue an independent investigation, but for partisan purposes. All spring and summer, right-wing radio hosts with national audiences stirred up their listeners with terrifying tales from Washington. Rush Limbaugh routinely told his 20 million radio listeners that Whitewater is about health care, and I finally understood that yes, it was. The ongoing Whitewater investigation, despite Fisk's findings, was about undermining the progressive agenda by any means. After 20 months, we conceded defeat of our plan for health care reform. We knew we had alienated a wide assortment of healthcare industry experts and professionals, as well as some of our own legislative allies. Ultimately, we could never convince the vast majority of Americans who have health insurance that they wouldn't have to give up benefits and medical choices to help the minority of Americans without coverage. Bill and I were disappointed and discouraged. I knew I had contributed to our failure, both because of my own missteps and because I underestimated the resistance I would meet as a First Lady with a policy mission. But our most critical mistake was trying to do too much, too fast. That said, I still believe we were right to try. Our work in 1993 and 94 paved the way for what several economists dubbed the Hillary factor, the purposeful restraint on price increases by medical providers and pharmaceutical companies during the 1990s.